Welcome back to Grifter or Gifted. You know the drill, we take a deep dive into the lives of some of today's most controversial figures.
Trying to figure out if they're, changing the world or just lining their pockets.
Right, exactly. And today we're diving into, well, I guess you could say a textbook example of that question.
Yeah.
Kenneth Lay, the former CEO of Enron.
This is a story that really embodies that question.
It does.
I mean, on the one hand, you have this guy who was hailed as a visionary leader, built an energy empire. But on the other, his legacy is forever tied to one of the biggest corporate scandals in American history.
Enron, yeah, it's a name that's practically synonymous with a corporate greed and accounting fraud.
Right.
For those who might not remember the specifics, can you remind us just how big was Enron and what were they known for?
I mean, Enron was massive at its peak. They were valued at over $70 billion, employed thousands of people.
Wow.
They were pioneers in energy trading, really pushed for deregulation, and they were lauded for their innovative business practices.
Yeah, they were even named America's most innovative company by Fortune magazine, like 6 years in a row.
For 6 consecutive years, yeah.
Yes.
They were the darlings of Wall Street. They were attracting top talent investors. They were seen as this company that was really rewriting the rules of the energy industry, creating markets where none existed before.
Okay, so we've got ambition, we've got innovation, we've got success, like on a massive scale.
Yeah.
This is all pointing towards gifted, right? So where did things go so wrong?
Well, like with a lot of these stories, beneath the surface of Enron's success, there were cracks starting to appear.
Ah.
Early warning signs, whispers of unsustainable business practices, concerns about their financial statements. They were very complex.
Yeah, I remember hearing about those special purpose entities, the SPEs that Enron used.
Right.
What were those all about?
Well, these were essentially off-the-books partnerships that allowed Enron to hide billions of dollars in debt and inflate their profits.
Classic cooking the book.
Classic cooking the books.
So they were presenting this picture of financial health that was completely misleading.
Completely misleading, and this deception went on for years.
Yes.
With Enron's stock price soaring while the company was rotting from the inside.
Okay, hold on. If things were this bad, somebody must have tried to raise the alarm, right?
Yep.
I mean, were there any whistleblowers?
Yeah, there was one very notable whistleblower, Sharon Watkins. She was an Enron vice president, and she famously wrote a memo to Ken Lay warning him about the accounting irregularities and the potential for Enron to implode in a wave of accounting scandals.
That is gutsy.
Very gutsy.
So what was Lay's response? Did he take her warning seriously?
That's where things get really interesting and where the grifter side of the equation starts to come into play.
Okay.
Lay's defense was that he was fooled by his CFO, Andrew Fastow, and that he had no knowledge of the fraud that was taking place.
He's claiming to be a victim of circumstance.
He claimed to be a victim.
So he's saying that he was completely in the dark despite being the CEO of this massive company.
Exactly. His legal team argued that Lay's expertise was in strategic vision, not the nitty-gritty of accounting.
Right.
And that he trusted his executives to handle those matters. They painted him as a man who was too trusting, too focused on the big picture to notice the intricacies of Enron's financial dealings.
But how believable is that? I mean, this is a company that he built from the ground up.
Right.
Are we really supposed to believe that he had no idea how the money was being managed?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that continues to be debated to this day.
I bet.
Some people believe Lay's claims of ignorance. They see him as this visionary leader who was betrayed by those he trusted. Others see him as a cunning manipulator who orchestrated the entire scheme, enriched himself while knowingly misleading investors and employees.
Yeah, so we've got these conflicting views of Lay. On the one hand, he's this brilliant businessman who brought innovation and growth to the energy sector. On the other, he's at the center of this massive corporate scandal that defrauded countless people and had these far-reaching consequences for the entire economy.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating and complex story, and we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
To really understand Ken Lay and answer the question of grifter or gifted, I think we need to dig deeper into the heart of the scandal.
Okay.
Examine the evidence and consider the perspectives of those who were closest to him.
Let's do it. Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of the scandal.
Yeah.
How did Enron manage to pull this off for so long?
Well, it was incredibly complex, involving layers of shell companies, off-balance sheet transactions.
Oh, yeah.
Mark-to-market accounting, it gets pretty complicated, but essentially it allowed Enron to book future profits as current revenue, creating this illusion of phenomenal growth.
So it wasn't just about hiding the debt, it was about artificially inflating their earnings to boost the stock price.
Exactly. And this created a vicious cycle as Enron's stock price soared. Executives were incentivized to keep the scheme going to maintain their wealth and status.
Right. And where does Lay fit into all of this? I mean, was he actively involved in these machinations, or was he truly clueless as he claimed?
Well, the prosecution argued that Lay was not just aware of the fraud, but was a driving force behind it.
Really?
They presented evidence of Lay personally profiting from the inflated stock prices, selling millions of dollars worth of shares, while encouraging employees to buy more.
It's hard to believe that someone at the helm of the company wouldn't know about these kinds of things.
Right. But Lay maintained his innocence throughout his trial. He insisted that he relied on the expertise of his financial team and that he had no reason to doubt their representations.
So it's almost like he's saying he was a victim of his own success.
Yeah.
Too busy being a visionary leader to pay attention to the details.
That's part of what makes this case so intriguing. Was he a master manipulator who carefully crafted a facade of ignorance, or was he genuinely oblivious to the extent of the fraud?
Yeah, it's easier for people to see him as a grifter, especially considering the devastating impact of Enron's collapse.
Absolutely. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings.
Right.
Investors lost billions of dollars. The entire energy industry was shaken to its core.
And let's not forget about the political angle as well. You mentioned earlier that Lay had these close ties to George W. Bush. How did those connections factor into the story?
Well, Lay was a major political donor, particularly to the Republican Party. He had access to the highest levels of government and was known to advocate for policies that benefited Enron.
So did those connections play a role in Enron's rise or fall?
That's hard to say definitively. There's no evidence that Lay engaged in any illegal activities related to his political connections. However, the close ties between Enron and the Bush administration certainly raise questions about potential conflicts of interest.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to an already complex story. It's like trying to unravel this tangled web of ambition, greed, and political influence.
It is a tangled web, and to make things even more complicated, Lay died of a heart attack just weeks before his sentencing date.
Oh, wow. Talk about a dramatic twist. So he never actually served any time for his crimes.
No, and his death only fueled the debate about his legacy. Was he a brilliant but flawed leader who made some terrible mistakes? Or was he a con man who got away with one of the biggest corporate heists in history?
It's almost as if the question of grifter or gifted died with him.
Yeah, it's a question that continues to be debated to this day.
Right.
There's no easy answer, and people tend to fall into one camp or the other depending on their interpretation of the evidence.
So it seems like we're left with more questions than answers. What are some of the key takeaways from the Enron saga and the story of Kenneth Lay?
I think one of the most important lessons is the importance of transparency and accountability in corporate governance. Enron's downfall exposed the dangers of these complex financial structures that obscured the true financial health of the company.
Right. It highlights the need for strong regulatory oversight to prevent similar scandals from happening again.
Exactly, and it also underscores the importance of ethical leadership. Lay's story is a cautionary tale about the corrosive effects of greed and ambition, and the importance of prioritizing integrity and ethical conduct above all else.
It's a reminder that even the most successful and charismatic leaders can fall prey to temptation and make choices that have devastating consequences.
Absolutely, and it's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be informed and engaged citizens, holding those in power accountable for their actions.
So we've unpacked a lot about Kenneth Lay and Enron. What else do you think is essential for our listener to consider as they form their own opinion about whether he was ultimately a grifter or gifted?
It's amazing to think about how Enron's collapse impacted so much more than just the company itself.
Yeah.
We're talking about the energy sector, corporate governance, even bankruptcy law.
Oh, absolutely. Enron's downfall sent these shockwaves through the system, exposing these vulnerabilities and prompting some really significant reforms.
Like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, that was a direct response to Enron's accounting fraud. It imposed these stricter accounting standards and increased corporate accountability.
To prevent another Enron.
Exactly, to try to prevent another Enron.
So in a way, Enron's implosion kind of forced this much-needed reckoning.
Right.
It became a catalyst for change, even if that change came at, a pretty steep price.
Absolutely. And speaking of price, let's not forget the human cost of this scandal.
Thousands of employees.
Thousands of Enron employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings.
Right.
Many of them had invested heavily in Enron stock, believing in the company and its leadership.
Oh, of course.
And to make matters worse, Lay himself walked away with this substantial retirement package, even as his former employees struggled to make ends meet.
It's a pretty stark and unsettling contrast.
It is. I've actually had access to firsthand accounts from some of these former employees, and their stories are heartbreaking. They describe this sense of betrayal not just by the company, but by Lay himself, the man they once viewed as a visionary leader.
It's a reminder that behind the balance sheets and the stock prices, there are real people whose lives are deeply affected by corporate decisions,
Absolutely.
both good and bad.
The human stories are an essential part of understanding the full impact of the Enron scandal. They remind us that corporate greed and malfeasance have real-world consequences that extend far beyond the boardroom.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Kenneth Lay, let's return to our central question: grifter or gifted?
Right.
Was he a visionary leader who lost his way, or a master manipulator who orchestrated one of the biggest corporate frauds in American history?
That is the question that everyone asks, but there is no easy answer. The evidence is compelling on both sides. There's no doubt that Lay was a brilliant businessman who possessed charisma, vision, and a knack for innovation. He built Enron from the ground up, transformed it into this dominant force in the energy industry.
He was lauded as a pioneer, someone who was changing the way the world thought about energy.
Right, but at the same time, he presided over this culture of greed and deception that ultimately led to Enron's downfall. Whether he was actively involved in the fraud or willfully ignorant of its extent, the fact remains that it happened under his watch.
So he kind of possessed the qualities of both grifter and gifted,
Yeah.
which makes it all the more difficult to definitively categorize him.
Exactly, and I think that's the point. Lay's story defies easy categorization. It challenges us to grapple with the complexities of human nature, the allure of power, and the fine line that often separates brilliance from deceit.
It's a story that reminds us that success can be fleeting, and that even the most celebrated individuals can fall from grace, and it really underscores the importance of ethical leadership, transparency, and accountability.
Lay's legacy is a complex one, intertwined with both remarkable achievements and devastating failures. It serves as a cautionary tale for business leaders and a reminder that true success is measured not just by financial gain, but by the lasting impact we leave on the world.
So for our listeners out there, what's the ultimate takeaway? What can we learn from the rise and fall of Kenneth Lay and Enron?
I think the most important lesson is that we must all be critical thinkers. We can't simply accept things at face value, especially when it comes to those in positions of power. We need to ask questions, demand transparency, and hold our leaders accountable for their actions.
That's a lesson that applies not just to the business world, but to every aspect of our lives. We need to be informed and engaged citizens willing to speak up against wrongdoing and demand better from those who represent us.
Well said, and perhaps that's the most enduring legacy of Kenneth Lay and Enron, a renewed focus on the importance of ethics, integrity, and accountability in all spheres of life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Kenneth Lay. We'll be back next time with another grifter or gifted. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning.